Disclaimer: the information and education material contained herein is meant to promote the general understanding and dialogue of GANS processing. Such information is not meant or intended to serve as a substitute for a healthcare professional's clinical training, experience, or judgment. For patients and individuals, such information is not to be a substitute for professional medical, therapeutic, or healthcare advice or counseling. For medical issues or concerns, including decisions about medications and other treatments, readers, viewers, listeners should always consult their physician or, in serious cases, seek immediate assistance from emergency personnel. Prescription information, procedures, and use of medical devices information should be undertaken only by properly trained and certified medical personnel. We specifically disclaim any warranties, express or implied, including implied warranties of merchantability or fitness for a particular purpose. Such information is provided, as is, and is believed to be accurate at the time of its publishing, but it is the viewer's job to evaluate the accuracy of any information found in this presentation. Every case presented is of their own experience, applied by themselves for themselves, and it applies to their case only. Every person experiencing health problems should seek professional medical advice and consult their course of treatment with a doctor. The processes of plasma balancing described herein are a natural process which supports the body but does not replace medical advice or therapies one is already subject to.
Thank you, everybody. Welcome to the KISH American Knowledge Team meeting of 2025. How many more are we going to have? Maybe one more? Anyway,
We'll see.
this is a very important meeting as we're all trying to bring world peace on this planet. And it's a very important time because, you know, we're not alone in this endeavor. And as more and more people around the world are starting to figure out that we are all part of one humanity. So here we go. This is the Keshe Foundation Spaceship Institute Teachings on Plasma Science. We are discussing the advanced GANS tech. Today's subject is the Sun Shield. My name is Alexander. I'm from Canada, December the 21st of 2025, and this is part of the Keshe Foundation North America Plasma Education Series. So thank you all for being here. As you can see, we've been doing this for quite a while as we try and distill all the information down into more bite-sized pieces. And as we've been trying to unravel the understanding, each of us has to do that in our own capability. So please take from these sessions selectively what you can handle and apply them in the best manner that you see fit. Remember that the true intentions are coming from within, and so that's the whole purpose. And understand that even if you're a student, you eventually become a teacher. And it's very important for us to understand the difference between the old science and the new science, because we are in the beyond Beijing era of May the 10th, 2025, because the gold rush has begun. So we have to remember that our knowledge is based on the books as they were written by Marin Tavakoli Keshe. And it's not that he invented these universal order of creation of matters, but he managed to explain it in a much more cohesive manner. And so we saw the coming together of the matter, dark matter, and antimatter. But we didn't understand until book number 2 that there was a structure of the light. And this is something that we're going to talk about in greater detail today, because the light came from somewhere and it went somewhere. And where is that somewhere? And then book number 3, the origin of the universe. And I say, well, wait a second. Is the origin of the universe the destination, or is it the initiator? And so we see that the man's universe, which we are so fond of, and our sister universe, which we totally ignore, has come from the splitting, the duality, if you will, of the singularity of the basic origin of the universe. And even in man's universe, we're only concerned with that little tiny speck, which we call Earth space. But the problem, of course, is that we don't see ourselves as one planet, one nation, one race. And for 409 weeks, Rick Crammond and the Universal Council have been seeking justice and world peace for the humanity race, because we are all inhabitants on this planet. And just because we're in different sections, and just because we have different languages and different skin colors and different cultures, we are all part of this planet and we contribute to its existence, its survival, and its joy. So the notion that we are fallen angels comes from understanding basic physics and understanding angular density. So in terms of falling like a satellite, you're falling through weakness, and you come down to increased density, increased pressure, and increased gravity. All in all, it's an increased dependence on Earth space feeding, which is counter to what the reality is. Because when we understand that the angular momentum is conserved, then we have to look at the opposite, and that's the internal pressure of the GANS fields. And where does that come from? And how is that manifest? And how do we demonstrate that? So we talked about the sun stars and how there were tetrahedral stars that we understand in our plasma science, but stars are actually spherical. And so the question is, how do these sun stars manifest? And we understand that our sun is a star. And so there are many stars and many suns in the night sky. So are the fallen angels as a fallen star? Or are the arrived angels as an arrived sun star? And so this kind of becomes the wrestling match that we've all tried to rationalize, because we don't understand the plasma rule. We understand the physical rule where the higher strength beats the weaker strength, or the higher strength eats the weaker strength. But in the plasma science, the higher strength feeds the weaker strength. And so in that process, there are many variations of how this is done and what the results are. But the thing is that when two fields come together, they come together in what we call a transaction zone. Many see that as a conflict point when two armies come together in a field of battle. But it's also a binding zone. And in many ways, the notion of a war is a binding force. But a binding zone can be the bringing together the building blocks that are required to facilitate manifestation. And so when we do the physical manifestation, we're talking about density. And so anytime we bring these two fields together, we call that an inertia manifestation. So combine that to our understanding of the physicality, we can say it's an inertia density manifestation. And so we continue, and we forget how we got here, and we forget what the rules were. So we were given rules for our Earth space. And we started off with the 10 Commandments, and we see that those commandments were specific to us, as if we were the ones who were ignorant, we were the ones who were missing this kind of guidance. And yet somehow we arrived here without that guidance, but that's another subject. We found that there's another 14 commandments, and that completes them for a set of 24, just like a case of beer, isn't it? And it's important to note that one of those commandments is like, thou shalt not lie. And the reason this is important is because it actually reflects true intention. I'm going to say, how does that reflect true intention? Because we could say that our true intention is what is emitted. And so that becomes a point of discussion today, because in our energy binding search, it is important that we have a self-serving dimension point. I mean, that's what it is. That's how we are created. But we're so overcommitted to being me, myself, and I, and we say, well, we'll take all those three dimensions and exclusively capture them and do so at the expense of others, which is kind of counterproductive because the others also need the same set of energy binding techniques. And of course, when you steal from them, they are at a loss and they have two choices. Either they fight you in a form of revenge or they steal from someone else. And so as we become weaker, it's much easier just to steal. And in order to do that, then we have to lie and cheat and kill, in fact. And the problem with that, it adds more pressure because, and now we have to hide that. We have to work in secrecy. So we understand that there's two types of secrecy, one that is withheld from us and one that is just that, we're given false information. So if we recall then in the old physics, the speed of light is to maximum speed, but there is no light between the sun and the earth. There's only an energy flow, and it goes at a very fast rate, and it's not visible. So how do we measure that light? And another part of the problem, of course, is that we thought that polar shifts causes the ice age or tsunamis, and now we know better. So it's not a matter to harp on that. It's a matter to understand that we don't have the proper answers. The old science says it's not possible to regrow limbs. It's not possible to change the skin color, and it's not possible to change one's nature. But we have many, many examples. So the plasma science is it's not possible for you. We have to restate and add this to our understanding, and to understand that the reason we're seeking vitality enhancement is because we are, through our practices, leaking our loosh. And our loosh is our vitality. And it's not just emotional, but it's physical as well, because the emotional is a manifestation of that, and the physical is a manifestation of that. And we need to gas up, and we need to look at how we can enhance our vitality, because being old and decrepit are not two words that belong in the same sentence. We've grown accustomed to that, but how do you rationalize that when we have so many who are young and decrepit? So the old notions have been changed, and we are very selective in what we acknowledge. So if we look at what nature is telling us, like in the case of sunflowers, fields overlap. And so we're looking at the singularity of each field, but really we have to understand that a substructure of that is the duality of the magrav of the inertia field. So in other words, if we're looking at the sunflower itself, it has its own physical structure, but within that physical structure, it has other physical structures. So, we have the seeds and we have the petals and we have the whole flower. So we have many varieties of what we call sun stars. And that is manifest in our ability on how we produce GANS. And all of us were given the opportunity to produce this GANS in a life-saving manner. That's why we call them the cups of life, where we were able to produce an emotional GANS and a physical GANS through the understanding of the nanocoding process of the monatomic science. And this was a reflection of our core space, that inner space of emotional strength that could manifest into an emotional connection and a physical manifestation. And that needed a choice. That choice was the manifestation of a particular GANS radiance. And so we had different GANSes like carbon dioxide and calcium, zinc and copper, water and amino acid. And of course, now we're into the production of gold. And we are able to not just do that, but there's many, many more things. But what we are having even more difficulty grappling with is the cup of the universe, where we understand we have two hemispheres of the brain, and it operates on a totally different basis from a regular physicality. And so it has a mimicking of the copper GANS, the zinc GANS, which is physical and emotional respectively. But there's a connection, that connection to the carbon, which is the energy from the universe. And so now we go back to understanding that that's where the missing connection is. So if we want to get on the transmutation highway, we can't just look at the transmission highway of the carbon-12, but we have to understand that there is a crossroads at carbon-14 transition highway. And from there, then we can have a choice whether we go to the transmutation highway or the transmission highway, or stay on the transition highway. And all of these choices are coming together. And each of these highways has a relationship. That is to say, we found in the cups of life how we had different cup relationships. Each cup had a magnetical gravitational relationship and then manifested the soul radiance. So we had an emotional cup, a physical cup, and a cup of soul. And collectively, those three created a soul radiance. And so what did that interact with? So there was something missing. And we had the cup of the earth. And as a result, with the cup of the earth interacting with the cup of the soul, we created another inertia field, the cup of inertia. And that is the manifestation in the matter state. And that matter state can be in various levels. And we've been discussing very much so the matter state of GANS. But the GANS has an emotional connection. And then we find that if we do a cup of inertia from the GANS, in other words, we take two cups of emotion and put them together, we end up with the GANS of the GANS, another inertia field, another transaction zone, far more powerful. So now we understand how we can manipulate this energy and understand that the basics, that energy is always in motion and energy is always positive. So what is the charge? The charge is the magnetical gravitational relationship. So the emission of the polar energy is magnetical and the absorption of the polar energy on the south is gravitational. And so this energy exchange can be manipulated through the field rotation, the speed, the strength, and even the direction. But those are all snapshots in time. Because one thing we found out is when we created the GANS could flow in water. And it can move. So the water itself can exchange energy, therefore it can give and take. The GANS can exchange energy and it can give and take. But the thing is, in one direction is magnetical energy and the other direction is gravitational energy, because this is all bound on our field strength of our Earth space. And so when we look at the Earth matter and we say, well, is this transacted in singularity or duality? Well, each GANS bowl that we saw in the Beijing conference had multiple GANS fields within. And so each manifestation was another inertia density manifestation, inertia being the manifestation of two fields coming together. So when we looked at the gold production and how does it work with the rest of the Earth GANSes, we find that they are also all transacted in singularity, but they come from a duality. So the physical manifestation is the singularity, but the substructure is the duality, which is what creates the inertia field, meaning two fields coming together to create the one. And so if we understand that, going back to the nuclear feeding inertia of the book number 1, we find that there are many components of the gravitational stability. So there's a lot of complexity that's involved in there, but each fragment of the complexity has the same nuclear feeding inertia. And so we end up with many dimensional points. And as a result, we see that these energies are portable. So we can have many dimensional portability factors, of which we're talking about matter state, antimatter, and dark matter. And as a result, instead of having to go mine for it, we can create the periodic table of physical matter the same way that nature does. So we can create all the fundamental amino acids like carbon, nitrogen, oxygen, and hydrogen, and the physicality of copper and the emotion of zinc, and the mediums of sodium, magnesium, potassium, and calcium, and the necessity of the iron component of our blood. And we are just starting to realize that there's gold down there. So today's topic is actually the sun shield and how we shield ourselves from everything so that we can have this natural selection. And so this sun shield has to concern itself, well, absorption, reflection, and emission. And when we understand the reality dimension, we understand that outer space is not a place. It is a method of energy transfer because energy is in motion. So it's manifested by the soul of inertia. So that's what we have to look at and go back even further to understand the principal universal line magnetical fields. And so when we look at the energy from the universe, we find that it has a relationship. It isn't just a whitewashed universe. There's a lot of activity, a lot of different field strengths. And so there's a heat signature in the equatorial zone, and it cools as it goes towards the poles. So we find that depending on the nearness and proximity to the various fields and to its position within the principal universal lines, that it changes its personality, changes its structure. But it's hard for us to get past the fact that despite all our differences, despite all our conflicts, all of us have the same story of Utnapishtim, Noah and his ark. Someone got secret instructions and they set upon a genetic selection. And so as all the animals went on board, funny thing was there were no dinosaurs or woolly mammoths. These were land creatures. And obviously there were no whales and giant squids. Those are sea creatures. So there is an inconsistency. And another inconsistency was, of course, the zodiac, which had many signs of the zodiac. And there were 12 equal signs. And the cornerstone of the pyramid was a sphinx. The whole purpose of a zodiac cornerstone is to determine the era that it was built in. So we can isolate that between 10,350 and 10,450 BC, which has been also confirmed by Edgar Cayce through the Akashic records. Now, an interesting thing comes here is that that cornerstone marks the construction of the pyramid. But that's a fixed point in time. a fixed point in history. But history keeps moving because everything keeps moving. And what's interesting is that the three-eye atlas comes from the constellation Leo. And every time we look at its previous arrival, it also came from the constellation Leo. So is there a connection? Well, these are questions that the scientists have to answer. The point is that when we talk about absorption, we talk about humanity matter. So we have the singularity of each field and the duality of the maggrav of the inertia field. And in that process of absorption, we go through a conversion where we create the humanity matter. But we can create any matter. We know that. We have sunflowers, we have dogs and cats and cows and sheep. And then we have the sun and the solar system. But we have other stars. So we try and associate all that glitters, and we come up with another anomaly. We have gold, stars, suns, and souls. And then we get into the reflection, because the reflection is not what you see, it's what is reflected. So blue jeans are not blue jeans, they're actually every other color. What we see is the reflection, not to be confused with the emission. But not to exclude the emission, which is to say that whatever color you see is a reflection of what is not needed or what is given. So the blue jeans are not blue and the green jeans are not green. They are every other color. And so when we look at these reflections, we have to put these practical points together and apply a practical reasoning. So to understand the road to self-determination or the road from self-determination involves a practical philosophy, practical solutions, and a practical currency of life of the Creator. And this is ingrained in our DNA. And the question we have with the mitochondria, of course, is that the mitochondria, which are in every cell in our body, has a different DNA from the cells in our body and their DNA. So, what are we actually made from? And then, what is it that we're giving? Well, we're giving what we have to give. You can't give what you don't have. So the emission is a product of the absorption and that manifestation of the maggrav. And from that position, we have an emission. That emission contributes to the reflection, but the emission is not necessarily what you see, because there's more to it than that. So when you look at the feeding inertia GANS matter and say, well, we're not fallen angels. We are arrived angels, because the destination was Earth space, and that didn't happen by accident. That was a manifestation based on the inertia density. And so how did that selection process happen? So when we go back to the principal matter, which is what's traveling through outer space, we see the PM ticks, which are magnetical, and they are energy packs. They're nicely packaged in a parcel and delivered to Earth space, but not exclusively. And then on Earth space, we have this force field dilution of the antimatter, dark matter, and the matter gen. And so there's a convergence into this plasma gen and conversion into a maggrav field. That maggrav field is gravitational, but it doesn't manifest in the physicality until it interacts with an environment. And so by interacting with the Earth space, we create an inertia field where we not only manifest the Earth space, but we manifest our humanity matter. So all of this is based on the fundamental maggrav pathways, the gravitational intensity of attraction, which is part of the feedback, right? Because that's who we are, and the magnetical intensity of a repulsion, which is part of the feeding, which is what we give. And so the electron, of course, is representative of that. And well, so is the neutron. And we can clearly see the difference between the two. And we have to understand that when we're looking at the neutron, it has an electron and a proton derived from it, and the two work together. And so this is all part of the matter plasma dimension. The gravitational aspect we can touch and see. The plasmatic aspect of it is magnetical. We can't touch it or we can't see it. But both are part of the matter plasma dimension. And in that dimension, we have our physicality, our nanostate and GANS state, but we also have our plasma state. And all of these are matter plasma dimensions, and they're all part of the feedback process. And that's where we have fallen into the problem of being feedback dominant. So we can't rationalize certain things because we're not taking into account the counterweight measures. We can understand the physicality by weight and the atomic state by mass, but that's only part of the gravitational part that we fully understand. But the nuclear state, well, it's kind of exotic. We measure that in Teslas. And the plasmatic state, well, we measure that in time. And so the nuclear and plasma state are a magnetical counterweight to our physicality. So when we understand this counterweight process, then we can resolve the plasma matter dilemma, which is to say, if we look at the atomic state, the nanostate, and the GANS state, they're all very physical. But there is another transaction zone between the plasma state that is close due to its nearness and proximity. And so we can exchange energy on each and every state, or we can exchange energy through the maggrav energy transition and transfer state, as long as we maintain this balance. And we notice that because when we look at hydrogen, it's not just hydrogen, it depends on whether the poles are aligning in an ortho fashion or in a para fashion. The ortho has the two poles alike, and the para-hydrogen has the two poles opposite, but they are in balance because the hydrogen molecules have a covalent bond. And that is the fundamental energy particle. So the same way, when we look at the GANS of the GANS, we can take the cup of emotion and interact with the cup of physicality, and now we have a cup of life product. So this is the fundamental concept of the duality, where you have 2 points working in tandem as a partnership. We call it the twinity. So whether you're looking at the basis of the gravitational structure of the star formation or the gravitational structure of the GANS of gold, or whether you're looking at the transaction zone between the fields of creation and the fields of decay, it's all part of the duality. So it only stands to reason that when two forces come together, as in duality, the susceptibility is in singularity if they have a common denominator. And this is exactly what happened with the rotating reactors in Beijing. And each point had two reactors, and each reactor had more than one GANS in them. So the points were all susceptibility and duality. And when you take all the points of the star and you bring them together, you have this transaction zone, which is another manifestation. So when you look closely, you see the transaction zone is between the two reactors. So the concept of the twinity that we've been talking about for the last several weeks shows clearly that there are 2 points in the nanotech and 2 points in the picotech and 2 points in the GANS tech. They're all part of the sun structures. So there are 2 points of the sun tech as well. So we have to extend our knowledge based on the pattern that we see, because the pattern is reflecting a polyatomic inertia gradient, where depending on the field strength, you can bring two zones together to create a gravitational bond or a magnetical bond, depending on the polar orientation. And when you get it right, you can have a transmission bond. So you're working in two directions, and the manifestation becomes three-dimensional. So that susceptibility and duality is reflected on each and every point, and it comes together in that transaction zone in the core, which is your gravitational core. But that gravitational core is shared through overlapping fields with each and every magnetical point of the star formation. And then we have this dynamic plasma relationship where we have the horizontal transmission and the vertical transition coming from the core, the fundamental transaction zone, and being emitted through the poles, but it's also emitted at the equator. And so they come together and they create this field that goes around the maggrav. And so the Earth space point is within this Earth space field. And as the energy moves along this field, it goes through a lot of polar flipping, and each flip is another transaction zone. So this is the result that we see. And so when we extend that, we look at the creation of free plasma, where we have one star formation of the carbon, oxygen, nitrogen, and hydrogen interacting with another transaction zone of a star formation of carbon, oxygen, nitrogen, and hydrogen. That creates a gravitational transaction zone, and it's part of the creation of life. So we see that there's a structure within the structure, and as these structures work together, they work in duality. So this is how we have the same, what we saw in Beijing, the susceptibility and duality. Well, we had all the rotating reactors in the transaction zones working in tandem. And then they worked collectively to create that massive transaction zone, which had a very strong gravitational field force. And of course, it was very selective. So as we see in the 603rd Knowledge Seekers Workshop, there's a vertical alignment which allows us to escape from this path link of an infinity loop where the soul is interacting with the soul of physicality and the soul of physicality is interacting with the physicality. And as we look at the whole system together, we find that there's an inertia field emission. And so that allows us to cross that threshold, whatever that threshold is that we want between the different GANSs. So we start at the GANS of the GANS matter, which is the bringing together of the matter, dark matter, and antimatter. But we see that the combination actually produces a combination of overlapping fields. When you bring multiple GANSs together, you have to have multiple reactions. You cannot not have an interaction. The interactions are always happening. So fundamentally, each interaction that we try and identify is only a fragment of the complexity. And each of them operate the same way, that each of the three dimensions that contribute to that and total it up to the three dimensions actually creates more than three dimensions. We don't know how many. It all depends on the complexity, because the first three fields do not expire. They continue to operate. If they didn't continue to operate, they wouldn't exist. So now we see the full range from the galaxies, which all the energy that is emitted from the galaxies is magnetical, and it converges in a gravitational core. What is in that core? And how do we select that? So as we look at our universe, one of the most important aspects of it is our solar system. And our sun will absorb this energy the same way as all the cups of life have been doing. So we see that there is a gravitational magnetical relationship with the field of the sun. We see there's a gravitational magnetical relationship in the core. And because of the rotating field, we see there's a gravitational magnetical emission through the poles. But we also see a lot of convulsion because the sun is as a shield. And in those convulsions, we see bulges, we see bubbles, we see bursts, we see all these reactions. So our sun acts as a star, and that's emitting energy, but there's a selection of this emission. And that manifestation is the solar physicality of the solar system, and therefore manifests into the physicality of the solar system. So through the shielding effect of the sun star, our sun, there's a gravitational field effect, which is the manifestation of the planetary system. And that's where we operate. So we are part of that manifestation. So we too can give and take energy. So the gift of life coming from the sun is coming from the creation and the co-creation and the procreation. These are all the progressions of creation. We call it growth. And through that process, we know that what we emit is what we absorb. And we've been doing this at light speed and ignoring that aspect of it. But there's a lot more that we've been ignoring because when we look at the visible range, we see that it's just a tiny part. And so on one side, there's the infrared, which we can't see, and the ultraviolet on the other side, which we can't see. And then beyond that, we have the X-rays, and beyond that are the gamma rays. And, you know, we're just restricting ourselves to what we can see. We're discriminating, aren't we? And so through our selection, we interact with our soul of physicality, which we see in our chakras, our auras, and they show us the color of what our emotion is reflecting, and our physicality. But we're not just absorbing the color fields, we're absorbing X-rays as well. And so we know that X-rays exist. They have a gravitational field effect. And they're discriminating. They can't see the cells, but they can see the bone structure. So they are discriminating to the highest density. And is that the only thing that they show? So if we recall, with the nuclear feeding inertia, there's a gravitational base of the matter, antimatter, and dark matter. That's the universal creation of matter. And we look at the sun star inertia. So there is a gravitational base in the physicality, but all points are different by flavor. And that's just the matter state. But the same rule applies to the dark matter and the antimatter. So all points are different by flavor, by position, and by time. That's why each of us is individual. So the humanity matter state inertia is different by those factors. We're all unique, but we're all part of the humanity family. So there is a commonality. There's a gravitational consistency. It's all a reflection of the emission. But when you flip things around, there's a magnetical consistency as well, because we emit what we are. And so when we look at the GANS of the soul, the coming together of the cup of emotion, which is a cup of the GANS of the GANS, and the cup of physicality, also another cup of the GANS of the GANS. So we find that that transaction zone makes us a gravitational entity traveling in a magnetical field. So that magnetical field has to include what we see, which is part of the natural creation and natural decay. But it also is part of the natural decay and the natural creation that we don't see. And there's a bonding factor between them. And there's a distinct boundary because it's the counterweight, it's the balance. So that transaction zone is between two plasma fields on the creation side and two plasma fields on the decay side. There's an emission, there's an absorption. But when we look at the various levels of the carbon inertia highways, it isn't just a carbon 12, carbon 14, and carbon 16, which gives you different energy states which can counterweight each other. but they themselves have a support. And that support also has a background. And so how do we do this selection process? So as the plasmas come together, no two plasmas are the same. They are unique. And they come together in a magnetical gravitational transaction zone, so that becomes the dimension point of the inertia field. Now, what's interesting, we see the colors of light. They all operate at the speed of light. They all have the same speed, but they have different colors. And so there's a relationship of the wavelength to frequency relationship and how it changes. And so as the wavelength increases, the frequency decreases. But that changes the color. But it doesn't change the speed, not in its physicality. And so as a result, each manifestation, depending on its inertia density manifestation, whether it's carbon, silicon, or something else, shows a spectrum of color. But that color is unique. It's the fingerprint. And that's what we see. But when we look at the spectrum of totality, just a moment here, please. We have infrared, which we don't see, ultraviolet we don't see, and many others. Everything from broadcasting sound to gamma rays and cosmic rays. So that's the spectrum of the totality of the galaxy, the original point. So what is it exactly that we're discriminating? Is it the selection of our personal star of physicality? Is it the solar physicality of our sun? Or is there a pre-selection? Before we get to choose, is there a solar physicality of stars of the universe? So the sun is shielding us and giving us what we need to exist. But it has to be shielding us on many levels. Because the totality of the emission has to be absorbed. We can't handle it. So there has to be a shielding. And there's a shielding not only of what we are, but what we need. And is shielding us from of what? What we are not. And what we don't need. And since we are inundated with an emission from all the stars of the universe, what is the true intention? And if the true intention is for peace and prosperity, then is the sun shielding us from that? Or is the sun convulsing with the absorption of that energy and reprocessing it and offering us a pre-selection that we may choose peace and prosperity, which would only be natural if you were an arrived angel. And of course, the fundamental oxygen, a non-visible gas, even gives off an emission spectrum, shows the emission of light, how it crosses the threshold from the energy from the universe being emitted magnetically and having a gravitational confirmation of its arrival in our Earth space, which makes life possible on this planet. And many things contribute to life on this planet. But we have a need for supplementation due to consumption, which is through an acquired knowledge which was acquired on this planet. Again, a conditional teaching by ancient teachers, discounting the unconditional teaching by the Creator. Was the sun shield responsible for this? Or is the sun shield shining that on us and shielding us from that which is not good for us? So now we come to a new awareness. We have to cross that bridge, that historical threshold between the cosmic feeding and the loosh harvesting. Because the loosh harvesting affects the family of emotions. Because the emotion of man and its physicality and the presence, the position and the vision are all part of man's basis point of view. But the emotion of knowledge is the soul space point of view. And the emotion of love is simply irresistible. It does not need intermediaries. In fact, it is a dilution of emotions. There's a convergence into our man space. And the connection is through our carbon 14, because from there we can make the connection, because there are other aspects to our territory. Many are uncharted. And we are with the herd at the turning point, because there are many stars beyond the nanoatomic state, and they're covering the range from decay to radiation. And the sun is absorbing all of that energy and shielding us from what is harmful to us, creates life on this planet, bountiful, beautiful, and we are part of the artificial intelligence, that ancestral intelligence. We are the technology, and we are the inertia product. We are the image of our dimensional convergence points. So this energy is portable. Yes, it is. We can go through different energy state transitions. If we go through elevation, that's physical matter to energy state. If we do the inertia, it goes from energy state to the physical matter state. So the elevation involves expansion. So the opposite is true. Contraction. Susceptibility and singularity is the gravitational completion. So when we touch the gold of GANS, we actually turn it into the GANS, because we are the external input of the GANS field of humanity. So the susceptibility and singularity is translated into susceptibility and duality. So the whole process is through the dynamic soul initiator. What is the start point? The soul of the creator, soul of the earth, the soul of the family of humanity, the soul of the man, the soul of the body, the soul of the cells. All the same. No translation is needed. You can pick up and go from any place you want, because all we have to do is to tune in to the cosmic rays. That's soul food from the creator. We just have to turn on that energy and drop out of our resistance to receive that inertia point. And how we do that is by providing the pattern. The quality of that pattern reflects in the quality of the energy that we receive. And so we've been trying for 621 knowledge seeker workshops in a row to suddenly transcend the limitations of nuclear science and bring together the greater oneness. Our position, our time, our place in the universe. We've learned how to convert diamonds to gold. And we've learned how to emit the GANS affinity of truth. So the research teams of the Kesh Foundation are bringing forward a new scientific rescue using the One Nation Network, opening the blinds, One Nation Network at a time. And that time is now. Because our mission is to bring peace on earth and join humanity with the universal community. We want to bring man as equal to all the beings in the universe by teaching the plasma science and technology equally to everyone, that no one is left out and no one is abused due to the lack of knowledge. Help us achieve this goal. It's not our goal. Each of us share this gold. This goal is gold. This is the Kesh Foundation Spaceship Institute teachings of plasma science, welcoming all the beautiful knowledge seekers of the carbon nations, learning about the new selection process of the new organic plasma science. The World Peace Treaty needs for you to choose it, sign it unconditionally, and mean it sincerely. Because the point of the true GANS tech is to cross all of these polyatomic boundaries, the overlapping fields of Earth space, create the peace dome. Is the inertia of the present governed by dimensions of history? Or is it time to learn the history of self in a universal context? So the GANS is a peaceful superconductor focusing on true intentions. And the sun shield is an emotional sink, ranging the strengths of matter, plasma, and universal states. Plasma science needs to continue to be delivered daily via the Peace Dome in a practical exchange for peace on Earth. So welcome to the new golden outer space age. I hope you enjoyed this trip. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you, Alex, for increasing our conceptual understanding in a way, and maybe even deeper than that, of this vast, vast knowledge. Let's see if any of the participants would like to ask a question or perhaps take exceptions to something you have said. I know you've put words in a very interesting way. You said the duality of the inertia of the MAGRAV fields. You went through that rather quickly. Do you want to highlight that at all? The duality of the inertia of the MAGRAV field.
Okay, let me see if I can go back to.
And if not, just make something up. No.
Yeah, fake it. If you can't make it, fake it.
Or fake it first and then you'll make it.
Well, can you fake this?
I don't think so. It seemed to be quite thoroughly checked by military authorities and other high ranking within the Chinese structure.
How many times have you heard someone say, well, send me the information and I'll decide whether or not, it's good enough?
I'll look into it, right?
Yeah, I'll look into it. And let me ask you that question. Like, do you have the scientific equipment necessary to make that determination? Or how about maybe you don't have that? Do you have the education, the background, the knowledge to make that, Or
Right. I like the way Mr. Kesh put it when he said, how are you going to ask a guy to judge French cooking when he's never tasted a croissant?
that was quite well said, wasn't it?
He's got some very, very good opening dimensions in his words.
Yes, very graceful, very diplomatic. Not like us Westerners who we're more crude, sharp edges.
There was a question about particles and so on. And as Mr. Kesh said, we look for the energy comes before the particle, which I never understood either. I thought we were getting down to smaller and smaller particles in a way. But that is a manifestation of a physicality, as I understand it. So it's just an amazing amount of knowledge, and sewing it, putting it all together, well, this will come more in time, I believe. But we're certainly all being enhanced and enlightened.
Well, one of the concepts of the conventional physics was the wave particle duality. And it's interesting in the use of the word duality there. So, it's almost as if the energy was schizophrenic, right? It has two personalities. But what they don't tell you, and what they don't actually outline, is that these two personalities are operating in two different energy states. One is in the physical state, one is in the plasmatic state.
You mean like humans?
Well, that would let that by extension, that would be the correct conclusion. So, the limitation is actually initiated by us, because we clearly don't have that limitation. And although I'm teaching these classes, what I am exposing to myself is my limitations. And saying, well, if I know enough to do these classes, why don't I know enough to, shall we say, transmute between the planets, or, for example, what is the problem? And the problem is that I live in the same environment that you do. We are bombarded 24 hours, 7 days a week with conventional science and shall we say, unresolved questions. And that's why we get together, to try and resolve these questions in a coherent manner that makes sense. And the thing about it is, our old science has been disproven in so many ways, and they continue to, shall we say, review the accidents and review the mistakes, rather than focusing on the new understanding and trying to incorporate that into our practical solutions. And that's what Mark Ray is all about. So, here we are. We are the ones that are going to have to implement the practical applications of our advanced science.
And at least with the knowledge seekers, they have an open mind.
Well, that's a very important start, isn't it? But it's still, we have many knowledge seekers who are still scratching their heads to try and understand it, because they want to relate to something that they have a familiarity with. Well, it's like you go to another country and you say, well, you have a completely different food and different language, and I can't feel comfortable until I impose my food and my understanding on you. Well, that's, the tail wagging the dog, isn't it? We just have to adapt to the new environment. And we experience this all the time. So, let's say, you're single, you get married, then now you change your environment. What are you going to do? You're going to say, well, I'm going to carry on with all the things that I did when I was single. Well, I've seen that happen. And guess what? It ended up in divorce. If you want to be accommodating on a conditional basis, well, then you can get that. But if you want to build a substructure that is foundational, that is rock solid, and grow from there, then you have to be accommodating to the circumstances, and you have to grow with it. So you have to drop some things and pick up other things and take other things into account. Well, here we are. We are at the point now where all of our physicality is, laid out before us, and we have this advanced technology, and yet collectively, we're poorer. We're poorer than we were when we were younger. The buying power of the American dollar is significantly reduced. So the numbers are bigger. That's a mirage because they call it inflation. Why do we even have inflation? Inflation isn't that increased value of money. It's the increased value of the product that money can buy. So we don't make Model T Fords anymore with a crank. We make better cars. Here we have a visitor with a more sophisticated vehicle. And so now what do we do? This will be interesting coming up this week because, as we know, the space agencies have all shut down and blacked out the information. Well, okay. You want to live in denial, go right ahead. But, why are you retarding progress? What is your motivation? What is your true intention? Why are you, it's be like a family member. You have a family member and they decide to burn down the house. Why? What is your motivation? Are you trying to help the family? Are you a member of the family? What kind of member of the family are you?
Could be an insurance scam. But never do that with a fire because they are so professional in their investigation. They know exactly the materials usually and the sources, and they can reconstruct it. But yeah, it's just amazing. I was thinking, Alex, about this. We were talking earlier about us evolving or bringing a demise through these fields, and it must have something to do with the carbon-14 in a way. I think we can generate carbon-14, as he said. We can create our own sort of demise with cancers and other things, and he mentioned that as well. So does that mean some of the souls won't be able to handle this energy, and they decide to leave in a way? They don't lose the soul, but the physicality may not evolve. Does seem better, since they're able to tune it to the strength of the soul of the man. Again, I don't know exactly how this is going to shape out for us.
You can't compare it to yourself because you're an individual and your arrival here, shall we say, was pre-selected. So how much did you include and what did you exclude? So in other words, not only was the sun shielding you from the harmful things, but the stars out there are also shielding themselves because they exist. All you have to do is look in the sky and see all the stars, and they exist. So therefore, they are themselves their own shield. So what are they emitting? They're emitting what they've absorbed. And what they've absorbed has been selected, pre-selected. And now that they're emitting, they don't discriminate where they emit everywhere the same way as the sun does. And the sun emits this because all the planets rotate around the sun. So if you were to apply the compass coordinates and you say, well, the sun's emitting east and the sun's emitting west, and it has to do that because there are planets on both sides and they continue to move. So, today they're east and west, next time they're north and south. And so there has to be a balance, and all of these planets are able to exist and coexist and continue to move within the solar system because they are all products of the shielding that the sun has done. So what is exactly the sun shielding us from? And how much of it? Well, the answer is all of it. All of it. And this is very important because without that shielding, the solar system or the planetary system as we know it would not exist. So this is where we have that gravitational stability, and oh, isn't that where the sun is located? Right in the core. So how do we maintain our stability? So our soul is maintaining that gravitational stability as well, a structure within a structure.
All right, anyone else have a question? Thank you, Alex. I was going to say, since we're a collection of used fields or half-lives, as he said, did the souls know what they were getting into when they decided to manifest on this planet? I was reading a story about some people who went on a vacation and it didn't turn out at all as they expected. Or are we here as, in a way, on a rescue mission, or like firemen to help put out this problem that this planet is creating? Were the souls aware of their work here? Maybe the physicality wasn't, but was the soul aware of all of the, again, backwardsness and so on, some of the funny things we have to do to exist on this planet with a physicality? Were they completely aware, or did they just decide to pick a location and perhaps manifest to see what the conditions were like?
So what we know of the solar physicality and the emission of the auras, each person has its own emission, overall emission. But individually, day to day, hour by hour, that emission changes based on the emotion. So there are always not only different colors of emission, but there are different field strengths. And so that's one of the reasons that some choose to stay and some choose to go. And, it all depends on, what they bargain for. I never looked at it that way myself personally, but if I ask myself the question, like, what am I doing? Then I have to come up with that answer. I can't turn to you and say, Mark, tell me what I'm doing. You could be a critic and say, well, Alex, you're doing a very poor job. But that's an opinion. But that, doesn't help. It's not constructive in terms of what it is that I want to achieve. So what I want to achieve is different from what you want to achieve.
Right. This is what he was saying in the last workshop. It's all about finding out more about yourself.
Yeah, but at that point, you then have to make a responsible decision. You can't abdicate that responsibility. You can't just like how we do in physicality, you look after your own health, and when you fail to do that, you assign that to someone else and you call them a doctor. And of course, if you don't want to look after it, then they'll look after it. And they're not going to look after it your way. They're going to look after it their way. What part don't you understand? This is the mystifying thing. So, each of us has an ability to look after our own situation. And, each of us has to work within our capabilities. And, I'm not making commentary on individual capabilities. I'm just saying there are some people who are proactively choosing to be passengers and some proactively choosing to be leaders. The question then becomes is, if you are, shall we say, passing along as a passenger, what happens when you look at the path and you say, hey, wait a second, you're going down the wrong path? And you say, I don't want to go down that path. So what are you going to do? So
We can also
hey,
we can also say lead follower, get out of the way.
exactly. Exactly. But that involves now a new responsibility and say, well, all my life I've been, a passenger, and now I have to be a leader. Can I actually do that? So you get challenged. So what do you do? Do you wilt or do you flourish? What do you do?
Alex, I got a question.
Go ahead, Ike.
So I've always known inertia to be a force that will keep the object within itself. So it's inertia the same as gravitational stability that you mentioned?
Yes.
Okay, so if that's the case, how do you explain the cup of inertia? Because I understand cup of inertia as fields of gravity. Am I correct?
Yeah, but what field? Is it a plasmatic field or is it a physical field? So in order to have a physical field, you have to have an environment.
Yeah, so if we have environment, that means it's within and within. Because the environment will be the outside and then the objects will be inside the environment.
Yeah, well, that's
So
what we are. We are the object within the Earth space environment.
mm. So what is the purpose of cup of inertia then?
Well, if the cup of inertia is the gravitational stability, then the opposite would be the magnetical stability. Let me put it another way. Maybe I can draw an analogy. Let's say you have a bucket full of water
Huh?
and you want to move that water. So you put a pump in with a hose and you direct it to where you want to move that water. So you'll be moving it from one point of gravitational stability to another point of gravitational stability, right? Because you're going to direct that water to another bucket. But
Correct.
if you develop a hole in the bucket, now you have magnetical instability because that water will just spill all over the place. So the restriction to that spill will be actually the rest of the environment. And so, it's like I've had a flood in my place. And the water was flowing not only on the floor, but down the stairs and, all over the place. And I couldn't control it.
So just to maintain control or order.
Yeah, we still had motion, but one was stable and one was unstable. So you could say that any type of motion, involves a certain kind of stability. But is that what you were choosing? So the water was flowing all over the place. Well, that's kind of a magnetical stability, isn't it? It's just a complete mess, but it's still a magnetical stability. Where we become craftsmen and knowledge seekers is to manipulate that magnetical stability. Magnetical stability is what runs the universe. The solar system cannot work without magnetical stability because the sun is absorbing and shielding all of the magnetical field forces of the totality of the universe. Well, if you take the totality of the universe and apply it to the planetary structure, it would be totally different because the planetary structure is gravitationally stable. So the sun is shielding us. It's the sun that has the capability to do that shielding. The planets don't have it. They don't have the field strength to deal with it. If you
All right.
recall,
Thank
one
you.
of the concerns that Mr. Kesh had was whether or not our plasma units, our UBESUs or our communication systems could handle the field forces of 3I. And I think they have been able to handle it. Now, is it exclusively through our shielding? Is it, we know that the sun played a big role in that shielding. Is it the shielding of all the knowledge seekers around the planet or even the humanity? Or is it there's been some kind of mitigating force on the force field? So we don't know at this point in time. Everything is conjecture in that regard, because frankly, I don't have the equipment and the access to these confidential files, and we're hoping that someone is going to step forward and do that. And Mr. Kesh has indicated that we have already been able to record the transactions as they happened. So once you have that, now you have a record and you can analyze it. And so
But you have to ask in the same question, because since we're all hooked up to the system and we're standing on the earth, are we acting as a ground for the energy?
of course, of course,
So the more people that logged on, if you look at it from an energy point of view, that we grounded it into the system so the system could handle more energy. I guess we'll have to wait till Mr. Kesh comes and
yeah. But if I may add, so what we did, because of our specificity to the communication with 3i Atlas, we left our Zoom rooms open, right? So that we could mitigate it somehow, which is exactly what your point was. However, what about the One Nation network that has been distributed around the world? We are enlisting the services of more stars, more sun souls, whether they want to or not. And when I say whether they want to or not, I'm talking about their true intention. And their true intention comes from the soul. So the whether they want to or not comes from the physical manifestation as it is interacting with the soul of physicality. And I believe that's where the dilemma is. We are not able to cross that threshold freely because of indoctrination, because of acclimation, just because of reinforcement. But now, as we become more and more aware, we have additional capabilities, and I think that went a long way to mitigating it, as you have suggested, Randy.
Alex, do you want to, or unless Randy has a response, but go ahead, Randy. Do you want to bring up that background with the blue genes again? This is quite an anomaly. And you mean to tell me, does this work with people too? So the the red American Indian is not red. The Chinese is not yellow. The African is not black, and the Caucasian is not white. That's the field that they can't hold on to. Is that correct? Or pink for the Caucasian? I don't think they're white.
Well,
This
a
is the,
standing ovation to you, Mark.
and how does this, when you're saying it's the color that they can't hold on to, is this what they'll be reading you in space, or is this different than an emission? Or Maybe you
No,
could just
the
open this up.
emission, the reflection is not greeted in outer space. It's the emission. So the emission is of what you've absorbed. So you won't be emitting the blue unless you have that, shall we say, toxicity within you. Because it's not part of your absorption, then it's considered toxicity, right? So
All
you
the
have
plants and all the trees and all the grass we see as green is actually not green.
100%.
How could this be?
The eye
Because
of the beholder.
no, it's
If you
yeah,
take, so
the eye
ask
of
this
the
question.
physicist.
Take 10 people, stand them in front of a picture in a gallery, ask them to explain what's color they see. Everyone's going to see different colors, aren't they?
Well, we see different shades. I mean, what's red to you may be a different red to me. We do see it slightly differently, but just this idea of the blue jeans not actually being blue.
So if the light is shining on the plant, and that plant is absorbing the energy, right, and creating a physical manifestation, right, the plant is growing. Are we in agreement on that?
Okay.
So if the plant is emitting a certain color that it doesn't want, what is the neighboring plant then doing? It has to be faced with this reflection from this other plant. Is that a color that the plant wants? Now, there's 2 points that I would like to make. One is that the seed production, as a result of the flowering, comes towards the end or in the direction of the demise of the flower. Right? The blooming of the flower is one of the last things that happens to a plant before it goes to seed. And then the plant may fulfill its function and then withdraw back into its root and re-energize in a more gravitationally stable manner. But if all the plants are emitting green and the sun is shining, what is the plant inundated with? More green. Will the plant grow if it's emitting green and getting a reflection from other plants which are emitting green? No, it won't. So there are energy fields, energy colors, visible and non-visible, which the plants absorb. So they are selecting, they are discriminating, they absorb what they need, and they reflect what they don't need. So if one plant is reflecting it and it's part of the vertical family, and the other plant is reflecting it because it's part of the vertical family, then guess what? That reflection will not be absorbed by the neighbor. What will be absorbed is one, the energy from the sun during the daytime, and the energy from the earth at nighttime. How can this flower or the vertical people absorb the energy at night? You have to remember that the sun is shining on the other side of the planet. So even though it's dark, the planet is still getting nourished. And through that nourishment, it is now able to emit to the plants the energy that the plants want. And how do you know that? Because the plants grow wherever it is favorable to them.
And the bee automatically knows which plants to go to get the best pollen.
Isn't that amazing? Like seriously, isn't that amazing? And then look at the aerodynamics of a bumblebee. A drunken sailor has more stability.
But they still fly.
And they sure do. So are you going to tell me that they're flying through, um, avionics? I don't think so.
So if this was on a test and you multiple choice, you ask what color are the petals of this flower we're looking at, and if you put yellow, blue, purple, or other, the correct answer would be other.
Other than what, though? Other than yellow.
Okay, so
Yeah.
it's not yellow. What is it?
Well, there are shades of all colors within colors, right?
Yeah.
The colors are not pure colors.
Okay, knows a bit about colors, I believe.
Well, the complementary color to that color, which might be blue.
Right. But I think with your multiple choice selection, you would have to say other.
But almost everyone would get this wrong because it's obviously yellow.
And this is the problem I've had for 35 years when I first learned about this in 1991. It's still a problem today. It's just like magnetical is the giver. I still get this argument, from people. They don't understand that negative is the giver. You have to have it to give it.
So very easily we can be fooled just by our amino acid eyes. But I think we'll develop systems in the future where we can perhaps see past this strength level or expand that strength level.
So, this is why I keep harping on the surface to volume ratio, because that shows you the negative charge. You follow the negative charge, you follow the energy field. So then if you understand that, then you can understand the magnetical gravitational relationship. But, there obviously is a difference between the core of the flower and the petals. And each of these are a different structure. And where is exactly that threshold where you can clearly say, well, this is the seed and this is the petal? Where is that boundary? And then, can you actually walk towards that boundary and then step over it the way you do a threshold as you're crossing through the door? Can you do that? Well, not when it comes to this type of physical manifestation. Because at some point in time, there has to be a stopping of the inertia field and a starting of a new inertia field. So the stopping and the starting create a bond and create a bridge. That bridge is not linear from one to the other, because the stopping is gravitational and the starting is magnetical, which means it's bonded together. It's attracted. Opposite poles attract. So what causes that change? There has to be an interaction in between that causes a polar flipping. And where have we seen that? In the rings of Saturn. You see a ring, you see a gap, you see another ring, you see another gap, and this is exactly what it is. It's just that in the structure of the sunflower, these fields are converged so close together that you can't see the gap. Well, we have the same situation with the nanogaps, and then the GANSes, and the star formations. So there is a uniform manifestation of energy transfer. And so when we accept that methodology, then we can start to apply it. And when we apply it in our physicality, then we say, well, wait a second. If we were always saying that, you know, this sunflower, let's say, is yellow, and we realize that, okay, well, that's just for convenience because, you know, well, if you say, you know, well, what color is that flower? Well, it's every color except yellow. You know, that's not convenient in terms of our dialogue. So this is where we sometimes have problems with our terminology.
So
And
this applies to the yellow metal as well? The yellow metal is not yellow?
exactly. What color is the gold, GANS? It's black. It wasn't until you stuck your finger in it that it turned gold.
And then that's not the exact color either, is it? Because
No.
that's what it's emitting. Or
No, that's what
reflecting.
it's reflecting.
Mhm.
It's
Quite
only
an
absorbing
anomaly.
what it is.
It's quite an anomaly. But it is being explained through the understanding of the plasma science.
Well, this explanation is not physically is not limited to plasma science. It's part of the physical science as well. So what is confounding is why we haven't applied this technology more. And it's, you know, when we look at the way technology is brought to bear in the physical practical means, we find that the military is the first at the table. They want to grab it because when they have advanced technology, then they can exert physical dominance of an opponent.
Yes, we understand that.
Well, but the sacrifice is our peace and prosperity and our limitation to engaging the universal community. It's not fair. It's totally not fair. We are being shortchanged, and frankly, so is the military.
Thank you, Alex. Anyone else have a question or something they'd like to raise, a point?
And when you're trying to separate, when you're mining gold, the hardest thing they do have to do is a separation of one element from the other element. Some of them are very, very hard to separate. So one guy told me, he says, I like it when it's dirty gold. He said, because there's more platinum, more silver, more rhodium, more all the other elements in that, which means when I refine that, I get more money. But he said, I got to spend 3 times as much. And this is the thing, it's again, it's all in the eye of the beholder. Say, this guy looks at a piece of dirty gold and says, hey, I see riches. Someone else say, no, that's dirty. It's not pure, so it's not good. Well, it's again, and why do we have the fascination with gold?
It's carried down through the RNA apparently over the centuries that this creates quite a bit of emotion in us. But the same thing with plastics, Randy. As he said, to you, it's just something floating in the ocean. He said, to me, it's worth billions if you know what to do with it as a space fuel.
How true.
Thank you, everybody, for allowing me to continue to present. Appreciate you all being here and carrying this magic carpet because it is getting ready to fly. Well, it is already flying. It's just that, you know, more and more people have to be aware of it.
Okay, very good. Any other thoughts or comments anyone would like to share? Please do. Okay, thank you. If not, I'll take the screen back. Okay, and we'll just bring up a couple. And of course, this is the season of the three wise men, but of course, now we're extending it to the full year. Let me make sure we see that picture. And again, it wasn't the gifts of precious oil or incense or precious metals. It was the idea and the ethos of Mitraism is the thinking, speaking, and acting good. As Mr. Kesh said, if you don't think wrong, then you don't talk wrong and you don't do wrong. We're not there, but we're starting to apply this more and more. And as we understand, this is quite a shielding for all of us, I think, in our physicality as well as in our energy dimension. Because we can create by going off in the wrong path. So apply this, and most of the Christians missed it. At least I did. I know Mr. Kesh mentioned that the gifts, as it's written in the holy books, is not anything what the three wise men gave. So again, it's for you to apply it to yourself. And I think there's more going on in our thought process than the physicality where we're offending. So again, I have many more thoughts a day than I do actions. So if you can sort of keep that in a balance, you create a beautiful shielding for yourself. And then, of course, the other slide is may you be proud of the work you do, the person you are, and the difference you make. And applying just these three features, easier said than done, I think, again, this is all tangled up and entwined with the World Peace Treaty and the rest. But you'll feel quite pleased with yourself the more you can, in a way, accomplish this, because you're not stealing from any other soul. You're actually either giving to them or elevating them without thinking wrong or talking wrong about them or doing wrong with them. But it's, again, for you to apply as you see necessary. And this, of course, is the cornerstone of the ethos of the universe. I'm going to play the final disclaimer. The session will come to a close. Any other thoughts or questions? If not, I'll find the disclaimer and hopefully it will play. Thank you all for being here and carrying a very small piece of a very huge carpet, which is going to stretch again across the universe. This is not only for mankind, but this apparently is for the elevation of the entire, or unification and elevation of the entire creation. But that may take some time. As he said, don't look for the change tomorrow, but he's also said, look for the change tomorrow. So I think we'll start to see the change, and it's going to be in a progressive enhancement process going on. So thank you again, all souls, for being here. As Mr. Kesh continues to emphasize, it wasn't your physicality that brought you here, but it was the strength of your soul. And we're just starting to understand that. So thank you all. Have an amazing rest of your day. Thank you, Alex, again. And we'll continue on.
Alex.
Yes.
Yes,
Mike, before you go, Alex, can you answer the question for me, please?
sure.
On the talking about the colors, what is the science behind it? Why is it that it's absorbing every other color but reflecting the color that we're actually seeing? And the fact that we are seeing that, does it mean it's only the visible spectrum?
May I explain?
Go ahead, Erm.
Okay, so the rainbow has all these different colors in it, right?
Right.
If you take one of those and you shine it back, all the rest of them are for you to keep. Does that make sense? Then only what shines back reaches your eyes.
That was a very nice way of putting it. So you can keep the rest, but that's the one you emanate.
Yeah, that's the one that you can see is the one that's not absorbed, but sent back. And that's a reflection. And that's from the full spectrum sunlight mostly. The sun has everything, just about every wavelength in its light. And whatever gets bounced back to us is what it's not being kept.
Okay, maybe Alex would like to share, or if you're
But are we seeing that bounce back because of the visible spectrum that we can amino acid can function on? What if we're in a different spectrum? Are we gonna see the same exact color? But I remember Mr. Case mentioned something about when we go to space, we can only interact with colors too.
If you were somewhere else, like if you were in a bar and all they had was red light, what color do the plants look like? They look black. Because anything, right? Isn't that right? All they reflect is red, but they don't have the whole spectrum. So they don't. The red light doesn't have any green in it for the plant to reflect to your eyes.
I think I'm understanding what you're saying here.
Good. That's one of the things my dad taught me when I was little. He said things are not the color they look.
And as an artist, he should have known, right?
Oh, he was a student of Leonardo da Vinci. He taught us so many things.
Alex, anything you'd like to add?
Oh, I thought that was an excellent example that Irmgard
Yes,
brought up.
that's perfect.
Okay, here's something that I would like to add. In the physical science, we have been able to achieve 2 and 3 times the crop yields by changing the color of the environment. So in other words, the reflection of the environment was the colors that the plants really wanted.
Reflection of the environment.
Right, and it wasn't green.
Exactly.
So-
If you shine green light on a plant, it doesn't want to grow.
Exactly.
Because it needs all the other stuff. It throws away the green.
If you study controlled climate cropping, you will find that the green is the worst color you could possibly imagine. So the whole notion of having a greenhouse is so bad.
And what about the whole green movement?
By extension, of true intention. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Alex. Thank you, Ike, and everyone else that's here.
Thank you.
Even those who are just here in the energy dimension, there's probably far more than we see in the physicality. Thank you all again. Have a great day. I'm going to play the final disclaimer and the session will come to a close. But of course, the knowledge carries on in a much bigger and broader dimension to more people on this planet as we all start, in a way, to wake up to this new understanding of who we are in the universe and understanding ourselves much better. But it's a process and we're going through it. As he said, it's time for the man to go through this process. So thank you all for being part of it. And we thank your souls. And of course, happy birthday to Mitra. And the next session for the Knowledge Seekers Workshop will be on Thursday. And I'm sure Mr. Kesh will be highlighting some of the things that they've seen in some of the Zoom. The Zoom will be on, I believe, through Monday. I'm not exactly sure, but we'll see. As of right now, the Zoom session is still on, so feel free to avail yourself, and you don't have to sit there with headphones or anything. You can continue your regular work and allow your structure to be studied in a way to see what changes that they can bring. So thank you all. Alex says thank you all as well, and season's greetings. And Happy New Year. We're looking forward to it. Thank you all.